The hotel manager had already called security when the barefoot bride burst through the ballroom doors. Her white dress was too large at the shoulders, the hem dark with rainwater. One satin shoe remained on her foot, the other was somewhere on the road behind her. Hundreds of wealthy guests turned toward her as the musicians stopped playing. Beneath the cold crystal lights, 23-year-old Lily Carter looked less like a bride than someone escaping a sentence. "Stop her!" her stepmother shouted. Two security guards moved toward Lily, but a silver-haired man at the altar slowly raised one hand. "Let her come!" His voice was quiet, yet the entire ballroom obeyed. Charles Whitmore was 72, a billionaire investor whose name appeared on hospitals, libraries, and glass towers across the country. He stood beneath an arch of white roses in a perfectly tailored black suit, leaning slightly on an ebony cane. The newspapers called him brilliant. Business rivals called him ruthless. Lily's stepmother called him the answer to all their problems. Lily called him a stranger. Only 3 weeks earlier, she had been cleaning motel rooms beside the interstate, saving every crumpled dollar in an old blue backpack. Then her father died, leaving behind medical bills, an unfinished mortgage, and a will that placed everything under her stepmother's control. Within days, Lily had been given a choice that was not really a choice. Marry Charles Whitmore, or watch her late mother's small house be sold to pay the debts. Her stepmother had smiled while presenting the papers. "You should be grateful. Girls like you don't get rescued twice." Now, standing in front of the most powerful man she had ever met, Lily felt every eye measuring her cheap dress, her trembling hands, and the small scar running along her left wrist. Hidden beneath the fabric near her heart was an old photograph she had carried since childhood. Its corners were soft, almost worn away. She pressed her fingers against it, reminding herself that before her mother died, she had made one promise. Never let fear decide who you become. Charles studied her face for several long seconds. There was no anger in his eyes. Only something Lily could not understand, recognition, perhaps, or grief. "You tried to run," he said. "I changed my mind." A murmur moved through the guests. Her stepmother rushed forward, gripping Lily's arm hard enough to make her wince. "The contracts are signed. Don't embarrass us." Charles's gaze dropped to the hand on Lily's arm. "Release her." The words were soft, but Lily's stepmother immediately stepped back. Charles turned toward the waiting minister. Lily expected threats, humiliation, perhaps a reminder of everything she was about to lose. Instead, the old man looked at her as though he knew exactly how trapped she felt. "You may walk away," he said. "No one in this room will stop you." Lily stared at him. Behind her stood freedom, and the certain loss of the only home where she could still remember her mother's voice. Ahead stood a marriage to a man nearly 50 years older than her, surrounded by secrets she could already feel closing in. Her hands stopped trembling. Lily stepped beside him. "Finish the ceremony." Hours later, inside the silent mansion where she was expected to spend her wedding night, Charles locked the bedroom door, placed his cane against the wall, and removed a sealed envelope from his coat. Then he looked at his frightened young bride and said the words that changed everything. "Lily, I did not marry you because I wanted a wife." Lily stood frozen beside the bed, still wearing the rain-stained wedding dress. The mansion around her was so quiet she could hear the old clock downstairs counting each second. Charles Whitmore placed the sealed envelope on a small table between them, then slowly sat in an armchair near the window. "I married you because I made a promise," he said. Lily's throat tightened. "To whom?" Charles looked at the photograph-shaped outline beneath the fabric near her heart. "To your mother." For a moment, Lily forgot how to breathe. Her mother, Anna Carter, had died when Lily was 9. She remembered warm hands, the smell of lavender soap, and a soft voice reading stories beside a broken heater. She remembered nothing that connected her mother to a billionaire. "That's impossible." Charles did not argue. He only pushed the envelope toward her. Lily opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a copy of an old employment record from Whitmore Holdings. At the top was her mother's name. Beneath it, in faded black ink, were the words, executive assistant to Charles Whitmore. Lily read the page twice. Her mother had never spoken about working in a tower, wearing business clothes, or knowing powerful men. After Anna's death, Lily's father had told her that she had once been a secretary but had left before Lily was born. He never said where. Charles watched her carefully. "Your mother saved my life," he said. Lily looked up. "From what?" "From becoming the kind of man who believed money could replace decency." He explained that 24 years earlier, Charles had been building his empire with ruthless speed. He fired people without warning, destroyed competitors, and treated loyalty as weakness. Anna had been the only employee who spoke to him without fear. One winter evening, a warehouse worker was injured on the job. The company's lawyers advised Charles to deny responsibility. Anna refused to remain silent. She brought him the worker's family photograph and placed it on his desk. She said, "You can win the case and still lose yourself." Charles glanced toward the dark window. "I paid for the man's treatment. I changed the company policy the next morning." Lily's anger did not disappear, but something inside it shifted. "Then why did she leave?" Charles's expression hardened with old regret. "Because she discovered something she was never supposed to see." Before Lily could ask more, he nodded toward her blue backpack, which had been placed near the wardrobe by a servant. She moved to it instinctively. The backpack was faded, one zipper repaired with thread. Inside were 2 dresses, an old paperback book, a small tin box, and the photograph she had carried since childhood. Lily removed it. The image showed her mother standing beside a younger Charles Whitmore outside a hospital. Between them was a little boy holding a red toy airplane. Lily had always assumed the man was a doctor, and the child was someone her mother had helped. Charles's hand trembled when he saw it. "That boy was my son, Daniel." Lily studied the picture. The child's eyes seemed strangely familiar. "My mother knew your family?" "She knew more than that." Charles reached into his jacket and took out a second photograph. It showed the same boy years later, older now, smiling beside Anna. On the back, someone had written a date. The date was 8 months before Lily was born. Lily's pulse quickened. Charles leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your father was not the man who raised you." Lily stared at the photograph until the faces blurred. Daniel Whitmore. The billionaire's only son. The man standing beside her mother 8 months before she was born. "No," Lily whispered. "You're wrong." Charles lowered his eyes. "I wish I were." Before he could explain further, someone struck the bedroom door 3 times. "Mr. Whitmore, open this door." It was a woman's voice, cold, controlled, and furious. Charles's face changed. He slipped the second photograph back into his jacket and opened the door. A tall woman in a black evening gown stepped inside, followed by Lily's stepmother and 2 men carrying leather folders. Lily recognized the woman from business magazines displayed in the motel lobby. Victoria Whitmore, Charles's daughter and the acting CEO of Whitmore Holdings. She looked at Lily as if she were something dragged in from the street. "So it's true," Victoria said. "You actually married her." Charles remained beside the door. "The ceremony was legal. This isn't a marriage. It's a public breakdown." Lily's stepmother folded her arms, wearing the satisfied expression of someone waiting to collect a reward. Victoria placed the document on the table. "Sign the annulment tonight. We'll pay her enough to disappear." Lily felt the insult, but she did not move. All her life, people had assumed silence meant weakness. Motel guests left coins on dirty tables as if she were invisible. Her stepmother spoke about her as though she were furniture. Even at her own wedding, strangers had watched her with amusement instead of concern. She had learned not to spend her dignity proving she possessed it. Charles tapped his cane once against the floor. "She is not leaving." Victoria's gaze shifted to the old photograph in Lily's hand. "What is that?" Lily closed her fingers around it. "Something that belonged to my mother." Her stepmother suddenly stepped forward. "Anna never knew this family." Charles turned toward her. The room became still. Lily noticed the smallest change in her stepmother's face. Not confusion. Fear. You knew my mother worked for him, Lily said. Her stepmother laughed too quickly. Your mother cleaned offices. She filled your head with fantasies. Charles's jaw tightened. That is a lie. One of the lawyers cleared his throat and opened a folder. He explained that Charles's marriage had triggered an emergency clause in the Whitmore family trust. If the union remained valid for 30 days, Lily could become a beneficiary of assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Now Lily understood why everyone had entered the room so quickly. This was never only about an old man marrying a poor girl. It was about control. Victoria stepped closer. Did you plan this with him? No. You expect me to believe a motel maid married my father for love? Lily met her eyes. I didn't marry him for money. Then prove it. Leave with nothing. The words cut deeper than Lily expected, because part of her wanted to do exactly that. Walk out. Return to the small house. Pretend she had never seen the photographs. Then she noticed something protruding from the lawyer's folder. A copy of her father's death certificate. There was a handwritten note attached to it. Lily reached for the page, but the lawyer snapped the folder shut. What was that? She asked. No concern of yours. Charles looked at the man. Open it. The lawyer hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Lily moved closer, calm now, watching every face in the room. The date on the note was 3 days before her father's death. And beneath it was the name of the private hospital owned by Whitmore Holdings. Charles read the note, and the color drained from his face. Lily's stepmother backed toward the door. Charles looked at Lily, his voice heavy with dread. Your father tried to contact me before he died. Charles ordered everyone into the library. The room was lined with dark wood and old books, but beneath the warm lamps, no one looked comfortable. The lawyer placed the folder on the desk. Lily's stepmother stood near the door, pale and restless, while Victoria watched her father with growing suspicion. Inside the folder was a letter written by the man who had raised Lily. The handwriting was weak and uneven. Charles read it aloud. If anything happens to me, find Lily. Anna's daughter is in danger. The truth was hidden in the hospital records. Lily felt the floor tilt beneath her. Her father had known. He had known who she was, and he had tried to protect her. Victoria took the letter from Charles. This could be forged. It isn't, Lily said quietly. Everyone turned toward her. She pointed to a small ink mark beneath the signature. Her father had worked as a mechanic for most of his life. Years earlier, a metal shard had injured his right hand, leaving him unable to close 2 fingers completely. Whenever he wrote, the side of his palm dragged across the page, creating the same faint smear. That mark was on every birthday card he ever gave me. For the first time, Victoria had no answer. Charles called the private hospital and demanded access to archived files. Within minutes, an administrator appeared on a video screen, frightened and defensive. He claimed the records had been destroyed in a system migration. Lily listened without interrupting. Then she noticed the hospital logo on the letterhead. A silver tree inside a circle. She had seen it before. Not in her father's papers. Not in the photographs. In the old paperback book inside her blue backpack. Lily ran upstairs and returned carrying the worn novel her mother had read to her as a child. Its spine was cracked, and several pages had come loose. Everyone watched as she opened the back cover. Hidden beneath the paper lining was a thin plastic card bearing the same silver tree. A hospital archive access card. Charles rose slowly from his chair. Where did you get that? It was inside this book when my mother gave it to me. On the back of the card was a handwritten number. The administrator's face changed the moment he saw it. That archive was sealed 23 years ago. Charles leaned toward the screen. Open it. The administrator entered the number. A list of scanned documents appeared. Birth records. Internal memos. Legal notices. Then a DNA report. The room stopped breathing. The report identified Daniel Whitmore as Lily's biological father. But that was not the document that made Victoria grip the edge of the desk. Below it was an internal investigation showing that Daniel had intended to acknowledge Lily publicly. He had also planned to transfer part of his inheritance into a trust for Anna and her unborn child. 3 days later, Daniel died in a car accident. The investigation had been closed by a senior executive at Whitmore Holdings. Victoria stared at the signature. It belonged to her late mother. Charles sank into his chair. Lily's stepmother suddenly reached for the door. Lily stepped in front of her. "Why are you afraid?" "I'm not." But Lily had already seen something else in the archive. A payment record issued 1 week after Daniel's death. The recipient was Lily's stepmother. Charles looked from the screen to the woman by the door. His voice was barely audible. "What did my family pay you to hide?" Lily's stepmother looked toward the door, but the security guard had already moved in front of it. For years, Margaret Carter had controlled every room she entered with raised eyebrows, clipped commands, and the certainty that no one would challenge her. Now, under the library's warm lights, she seemed suddenly smaller. "It wasn't what you think," she said. Charles's face was gray with grief. "Then tell us what it was." Margaret stared at the payment record on the screen. It was not a fortune, but at the time it had been enough to buy a house, erase debts, and purchase silence. She admitted that Charles's late wife had contacted her shortly after Daniel's death. Margaret was not yet married to Lily's father then. She worked at a legal office that handled some Whitmore family documents. Charles's wife had been terrified of scandal. Daniel had loved Anna, a woman without money or status, and intended to acknowledge their unborn child. She believed the truth would damage the company and divide the family. So she paid Margaret to remove letters, alter records, and make certain Anna disappeared from the Whitmores' lives. Victoria's voice broke. "My mother did this." Margaret nodded. "But Anna refused the money. She threatened to expose everything." Lily held the old book tightly against her chest. "What happened to her?" "No one killed her," Margaret said quickly. "She became ill years later. But she spent her life afraid that someone would take you from her. That was why Anna had hidden the archive card inside the book. The worn paperback was not valuable. It was a children's story about a lonely girl who found a secret door in an ordinary house. Anna had read it to Lily on nights when the electricity was cut off and the apartment was lit by candles. Lily remembered one sentence her mother always repeated after closing the cover. "The safest place for the truth is sometimes inside something no one thinks is important." Charles covered his eyes. All these years, the evidence had been carried in a child's backpack, besides second-hand clothes and motel cleaning gloves. Margaret continued. After Anna died, Lily's father found some of the letters. By then, he had already married Margaret, believing she was helping him understand the past. Instead, she convinced him that the Whitmores would take Lily away. "He kept quiet because he loved her," Margaret said. "I kept quiet because I was afraid." Lily looked at the woman who had raised her with coldness and resentment. "You sold my mother's silence, then used my father's fear." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but Lily felt no satisfaction. The deepest truth was not that powerful people had failed her. It was that 2 ordinary people had protected her in small, quiet ways. Her mother had hidden a card in an old book. Her father had raised another man's daughter as his own and never once made her feel borrowed. Charles stood and walked toward Lily. His hands shook as he held out the sealed envelope from the wedding night. Inside was a handwritten promise bearing Anna's signature and his. Charles had agreed that if anything happened to Daniel, he would protect Anna and her child. But Anna had disappeared before he could fulfill it. "I failed your mother," Charles said. "And I failed you." Lily looked at the old man she had been forced to marry. For the first time, she understood that the wedding had not been an act of possession. It had been the desperate decision of a dying man trying to correct a promise broken by time. Then Victoria opened the final document in the archive. Her expression changed. "Father," she whispered, "Lily isn't only Daniel's daughter." Charles turned toward the screen. Victoria looked at Lily with tears in her eyes. She is the legal heir to everything he owned. By sunrise, the mansion no longer felt like a palace. It felt like a house where too many people had finally stopped pretending. The lawyers confirmed what the sealed records had already proven. Daniel Whitmore had created a legally binding trust before his death. Because Lily had never been notified of its existence, the assets had remained under temporary control of the Whitmore estate. They belonged to her now. Shares in the company. Properties. Investments. A fortune large enough to change not only one life, but thousands. Margaret was taken away for questioning after admitting to destroying legal documents and accepting payment to conceal Lily's identity. She did not resist. At the library door, she looked back at the young woman she had controlled for years. "I was afraid of losing everything," she said. Lily held her gaze. "So you made sure I had nothing?" Margaret lowered her head and walked away. Victoria remained near the window, still wearing the black gown from the wedding. The powerful CEO who had offered Lily money to disappear now looked exhausted and ashamed. "I judged you before you spoke," she admitted. "You saw my dress," Lily replied. "You never tried to see me." Victoria nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. For the first time in her career, she had no defense prepared. Charles's marriage to Lily was annulled that afternoon. He personally told the press that the ceremony had been arranged under extraordinary circumstances and that Lily had entered it under pressure. He accepted every question, every accusation, and every consequence. He did not try to protect his reputation. He tried to restore hers. Lily could have taken the money and left the Whitmores behind forever. No one would have blamed her. Instead, she made a decision no one expected. She kept enough to secure her future and recover the small house that had belonged to her mother. Then she placed most of Daniel's fortune into a foundation for motel workers, housekeepers, single parents, and young people trapped by family debt. She named it the Anna and Thomas Carter Foundation. One name for the mother who hid the truth inside an old book. One for the father who had chosen to love a child who was not his by blood. Months later, Lily returned to the motel where she had once cleaned rooms. She wore simple clothes and carried the same faded blue backpack. The manager nearly failed to recognize her until she placed a scholarship application on his desk. "This is for employees who want to go back to school," she said. He stared at her. "Why start here?" Lily looked down the hallway where her old cart had once stood beneath the cold fluorescent lights. "Because this is where people look through me." Charles spent his remaining years beside her, not as a husband, but as the grandfather she had never known. Victoria stepped down temporarily as CEO, then returned with new protections for workers and complete transparency in the family trust. Forgiveness did not arrive all at once. It arrived slowly, through honest apologies, quiet dinners, and actions repeated long after the headlines disappeared. Years later, the old photograph from Lily's wedding dress hung inside the foundation's entrance. Beside it sat the worn paperback book, open to the hollow space where the archive card had been hidden. Visitors often stopped to read the small plaque beneath it. It said, "Never underestimate what a forgotten person may be carrying. Because dignity does not come from wealth, family names, or the rooms we are allowed to enter. Sometimes, the person everyone ignores is the one holding the truth that can change everything." And if Lily's story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that being overlooked does not mean being without value. Leave a comment, subscribe, and join us for more stories about kindness, courage, and second chances.